Well, I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to come here again to Portland. And I've been visiting my sister in Vancouver, who's 90 years old. And chance at our age, old age, to see each other. Because she's 90, I'll be 88 in July, and you don't know how much longer we'll be around. So I thought to take this opportunity to visit North American monasteries. I don't know if it's my swan song or last visit, but so it's good to see that Dhamma Center developing so well. And I went to visit Ajahn Sudanto at Pacific Hermitage yesterday. And it's interesting to see, how much interest there is worldwide in teachings of the Buddha. Because when I became interested in Buddhism in around 1955, you couldn't tell anyone you were Buddhist because they would think you were crazy. So I was a secret Buddhist for many years. But the teaching of the Buddha is the thing that's so attractive about it and appropriate for this time in the history of countries like this, the United States, is that it opens up the reflective capabilities of human individuals. And those are not generally appreciated in modern Western culture and society, because Western culture is very much materialistically based, and they love science, psychology, and raise up all these kind of modern inventions to learn more about phenomena, to explore phenomena to its ultimate possibilities. And the Buddha, whose teaching is, we consider it like 2,565 years old. That's just an estimate. It's an ancient teaching, but it's a timeless teaching. It's not about Asian culture or a particular Indian culture of 2,500 years, but it's about being a human being and waking up to ultimate reality. So I just gave you the introduction, the Namo Tassa, the respect to the Holy One, and then give you the 3 refuges, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and then the 5 precepts, moral precepts. So this gives us, this is a part of a ceremony of the Theravadan Buddhist school, and so much of it is just ceremonial chanting, like in using the Pali language and so forth, is taking on the cultural aspects, ceremonial aspects of, especially as we learned it in Thailand. But what is the real meaning of it? Why do we respect? Why do we pay respect to the Holy One? What is the Holy One right now? And these are ways of investigating the present moment that we're all experiencing. So it's not about trying to figure out why I suffer as a person, or who's to blame for my misery, or, keep trying to analyze myself as a separate person, but to take the opportunity to investigate, who am I anyway? What am I? When I take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, what does that really mean? Is it just Thai ceremony, Theravadan Buddhist ceremony that we bring to Oregon at this time, or is it much more meaningful than just a ceremonial acquisition? So over the years, I had plenty of time to contemplate what Bhutto Dhammo Sangho, Buddha Dhamma Sangha really means in terms of the here and now, the reality that we're all experiencing, because the ultimate reality is here and now. It's not about something remote that you have to work toward or find in some other place. And the Buddha's teachings are teachings pointing always to the here and now. It's a timeless, we chant Akalika Dhamma, timelessness. It's apparent here and now. What is the Dhamma? When we take refuge in Dhamma, what does that mean in terms of the reality of here and now? And these are important questions to ask yourself, because the separate sense of separation that personalities give us, and in the American cultural conditioning, it's very important the ego takes kind of preference over everything, what I think, my feelings, me and mine, and the identity with the physical appearance, the gender of the body, the age, the color of the skin are all strong identifications that we give great importance to. At this time, American society does this. So what is apparent here and now that is not personal? So you ask, what is, if Santitiko Dhamma, apparent here and now, what is the Dhamma here and now? And this is, you can't define that question, can't give an answer to it in terms of another kind of intelligent interpretation of apparent here and now, but it's the reality of awareness here and now. This is what we share. It's impersonal. It's not personal, not like my awareness opposite your awareness. We create that sense of separation because the objects, like sitting here, looking at you, you're objects of what I see. I consciousness. So I'm conscious, sending my conscious experience out through the organs of my eyes, and I see all you people sitting there with masks on, and I wonder who is behind the mask. It's a very strange time. But in terms of Dhamma, we're not looking outward. We're not seeking Buddha as some external object, or Dhamma as some kind of metaphysical reality that we can't possibly conceive of. So we take refuge in Dhamma, a Pali word. But if it's apparent here and now, what is apparent here and now that each one of us knows is apparent here and now is that we are conscious. So if I ask any of you, any person, are they conscious? They have to say yes. You don't ask somebody else whether you're conscious or not. There's something apparent here and now. So Dhamma and consciousness, these are words. Consciousness is an English word. Dhamma is a Pali word. They're words, they're creations made by human beings. They're not words that, they're creations through thinking. They're thoughts that we create. And we can believe in these thoughts, or we can disbelieve in them. But what are thoughts pointing to? When the Buddha established his first sermon after his enlightenment, according to this tradition, he taught there is suffering. So that was an important point to make for all of us, because this realm was as comfortably as we can possibly live in it with all kinds of the most material advantages, social advantages possible, is still there's an experience of suffering, because we're always identifying with unsatisfactory conditions. The cultural conditioning, the ego itself is a condition created. It's not like a permanent ego. Or cultural conditioning is acquired. The ego is acquired after you're born. Like a newborn infant doesn't have an ego. It doesn't think about itself as being anything at all, but it's fully conscious. A human infant form that's fully conscious, that it wasn't created by human beings, wasn't created by Thais or Indians or Americans or anything else. Consciousness is here and now. And this is what we began to when we talk about mindfulness or awareness, why that is so important these days, why there are so many mindfulness teachings available on the internet, on YouTube and things like that, that weren't available when I first became interested in Dhamma. So mindfulness is a very important subject these days. Mindfulness teachers, vipassana practices and so forth are very popular conditions in the minds of many of us at this time. So what is mindfulness anyway, when we talk about mindfulness? And of course, we identify usually with, when we're driving a car, we have to be mindful. When crossing the street, we're mindful. When we're reading books, studying subjects at school and so forth, we're mindful of the objects that we're listening to, the music or the sounds, the smells, the taste, the touch. We're mindful of objects of the senses. So this is called sending your consciousness out through the sense organs of this material body. So is that all you are, is a physical body, a material body made out of food? And these are ways to investigate the reality of conscious awareness here and now, because we're conditioned from our innocent years as a growing child, innocent child, we're conditioned to believe what we're told. What's right and wrong, what's good and bad, what's acceptable or unacceptable. So each one of us has been culturally conditioned in various ways, whether it's here in America or any other country. The cultural conditions can be very different emphasis, different importance placed on certain virtues or ideals, but they're all creations made by other human beings. And so other human beings create languages. So languages are how we communicate on the worldly plane. So we talk to each other about politics, about religion, about culture. We compare things. We have the ability to compare what's best and what's the worst, and on like that. So we live in a world of thoughts, languages, concepts that we never question. Sometimes we never question them, like just the language that we speak. It's a creation. It's not Dhamma. So the word Dhamma is not Dhamma in reality. It's pointing to awareness here and now, consciousness here and now. So the Buddha's teachings are just words, but it's interesting to reflect on the fact that his first sermon after, his own enlightened awakening was to emphasize the common experience that every human being has is suffering. There is suffering. It's not a kind of belief in suffering. It's not asking to believe in suffering or that life is miserable. So it's not a kind of doctrinal statement and a kind of negative way of looking at life, but it's a chance to investigate suffering. What is it and the insight is to understand it. And to understand suffering doesn't mean to think about it or analyze it, but to reflect on one's own experience of being frightened, of being anxious, of being separate, worrying what others think. You know, the whole social conditioning is very much a conditioning to create worry and anxiety about yourself. In competitive educational systems and in the treatment of rewards and punishment for behavior, it's conditioning us to want to learn how to survive in a family with the parents that we're born with, and learning how to manipulate in terms of being a success, getting praise, winning prizes, and the fear of failing, of being punished, rewarded, rejected. So social conditioning is that way. It's about, who's moral, who's immoral, who's a criminal, who's right, who's wrong. So we live in a world where there's so much fear generated just through, especially on mass media these days, because there's so many things wrong with the world that we believe is our reality. So then the suffering, there is suffering, so it's just a matter-of-fact statement. It's not a doctrine, a religious doctrine to believe in. And it's easy to observe. We all suffer. So like at my age, getting old, the body doesn't function very well. My sight is not very good. You're all kind of, not only your masks, but there's a kind of haze around everybody. My hearing is not very good. I have to wear hearing aids. Old age is like this. And then if I see it in a personal way, then I suffer from it. Because as a personality, as an ego, my ego was formed when I was young. So the young ego, doesn't think it's ever going to get old, but then the body ages as the years pass, and that's just the way it is. So the Buddha was emphasizing using old age, sickness, and death as ways of reflecting the nature of existence within this particular form, human form, that we all share. We all live within these human forms that are separate from each other, that we can be attracted or repelled by, or we like or don't like, and we form opinions of approval or disapproval accordingly to our habits, to what we call our karma, the way we've been programmed to react to experience that we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think. So suffering is to be understood, and to understand something, you have to accept it. If you just react to old age, I don't want to get old and try to, stay young, that's suffering. Because the body, is like this. It's not young anymore. There's no way I can make it younger. So to understand suffering, old age is like this, we use these words, it's like this, is not a judgment about old age or about how things should be as an ideal, but the way it is, it's like this. An old body is like this. And in this way of reflecting on experience, you don't attach to it. Or if you are attached to it, strongly identified with your age of your body, the gender of your body, and so forth, then you just to understanding suffering, you let go of it. The body still is like this, The conditioned habits are, may not like getting old or getting sick, but being mindful of the way it is, it's like this. At this very moment, whatever you're thinking or feeling, physically or emotionally, just by listening to me talk like this is the way it is. Can I say how you should react to what I'm saying and how you should feel about what I'm saying? I can't do that because we can't help the way we feel in the present moment. It's like this, no matter whether it's happy, sad, pleasant, or painful. So it's like this is a way of beginning to accept experience as it happens, rather than trying to control, resist, create all kinds of situations, endlessly confront life with seeing it through judgments that we might have about it, but through just the awareness of the way it is, we begin to let go of these habits, these clinging habits that we acquired after we were born. And when we let go of the body, we let go of our feelings. We're not resisting or suppressing anything. We're just not attaching. We see the suffering that we create through this blind habitual attachment to thoughts, to ideas, to physical appearance, to values, moral precepts, right and wrong, how we become very fixated in our judgments about good and bad, right and wrong. And when we do that, then if we're attached to being right, then whoever doesn't agree with me is wrong. That's an enemy. If you don't agree with me, then I'm attached to my sense of righteousness, and you don't go along with it, then you're wrong. How does that create, a sense of opposition, of fear, of rejection? And that's why the world is the way it is in the present situation in Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine. The whole emphasis on who does Ukraine belong to and who's right and who's wrong. And so they're fighting, destroying each other, murdering, killing, slaughtering, destroying cities and so forth over righteous views, deluded attachments to certain concepts. And so that's why wars happen, because of this blind attachment to views and opinions, concepts, percepts. So in awakening to Dhamma, we begin to observe, witness the suffering I create in my life by attachment to conditions, to phenomena. And this is the whole emphasis when we talk about awareness, mindfulness, and wisdom, is to let go of not to destroy the world or it's not about annihilation, it's not about resistance, it's about understanding and knowing for yourself the suffering you create through your attachments to views and opinions. So in monastic life, you belong to a very traditional monastic order. And so, do we join the order to just change the perceptions to Buddhist ones? Has Ajahn Sumedho become a Buddhist rather than a Christian? Puts on a robe, becomes a bhikkhu, and these are forms, these are conditions. Is it just about refining conditioned phenomena so that it's much nicer than it was before, to get all kinds of concentration, refined concentration practices, to live in a more refined emotional, conceptual realm than the present materialistic one? Or is it to realize one's true nature? So the forms that we have in this tradition, the Pali, because this is the tradition I practiced in, this is what I can speak from, the Pali teachings, the suttas, they're mainly, not doctrinal positions or metaphysical theorizing, but they're pointing to the way it is. All conditions are impermanent. So this is the main statement this is the way it is. All conditions are impermanent. So that's not to be grasped as a doctrine. You don't have to believe it, but to witness to it, to observe impermanence, how your mood changes according to the weather, according to how you feel, according to what you eat, according to who you're with. Are you the same person continuously from day to night? Are you the same personality when you're asleep? Where does personality come and go and change according to other conditions? Because observing in my own experience, my personality changes according to who I'm with, the time of day, how I'm feeling, where I'm at. And the personality that I can witness, be aware of, the ego, is very unstable. I can't find a kind of permanent Ajahn Sumedho as a condition that is the same through the day and night. But what is here and now is that consciousness is not created. Consciousness, we can be aware of space, we can be aware of the four elements, the earth, fire, water, and air elements, the conditions that arise and cease, that are born and die in space. And this is what the suffering is about, is attachment to unsatisfactory conditions. Because a personality is an unsatisfactory refuge. Our emotional habits that we've acquired are very unstable and depend on so many other factors. When we depend on other people to be there for us at all events, to be friends for a lifetime, these are ideals. But is that really a possibility? It might be a good idea, something we long for, but people change according to other conditions. So in this world of inexorable changingness, we try to find stability in things that are, by their very nature, unstable and created. And then we wonder why we suffer, or what's wrong with the United States, or the political system, or democracy, or our relationships, our marriages, our friends, and so forth. Why can't we all get along and love each other when that's an ideal that we might share? Why don't we just learn to get along? Why don't the Russians and the Ukrainians just stop fighting and learn to get along with each other and cooperate and help and support? And that's how it should be as an ideal. But right now it's like this. It's fighting over views, opinions, perceptions that are created by individuals whose very nature is unstable. So what is stable? And if one's personality is not stable, one's emotional habits change according to other conditions, and thinking mind, they can create all kinds of fears and possibilities for disaster. The future can be rather scary. Climate change is a perception that's very frightening. It's not going to change for the better. The predictions are it's going to get worse. What does that do to your emotional state in the present moment about the future? Or the past? What about your past? What mistakes you made in the past, or the things you shouldn't, you feel guilty about, you regret? Or memories, happy memories, wandering on to memories of being happy and life being wonderful. Memories come and go and change. They're very unstable, untrustworthy. But what is trustworthy here and now? What is stable is conscious awareness here and now. And as you begin to investigate this for yourself, you begin to realize it, to be realized individually through wisdom. So this Buddhist teaching is a teaching which is cultivating wisdom, which isn't learning more about Buddhism and getting degrees in PhDs in Buddhism or Abhidhamma or anything like that. It's your own ability to reflect on the impermanence of your physical body, the feelings it has, the senses, the sense organs, the emotions, the thoughts, the ideals, the perceptions, all the cultivated conditions, created conditions that we, out of ignorance, identify with. And that's the cause of suffering. So all conditions are impermanent is a teaching that I've used over 50 years, because this was the two teachings that are terribly important to reflect on. All conditions are impermanent, and Dhamma is not personal, not a personal ego or self. So we say, Sape Sankhara Anicca, all conditions are impermanent, Sape Dhamma Anatta, all Dhamma is not self, not a separate person. So what unites us is Dhamma. That's unitive, because it's not created, it's not separate. And it's here and now, and you know you're conscious. But then when you try to think about it, what is consciousness? And this is the subject of modern psychologists, scientists at this time. What is consciousness? is it inside your brain? Is consciousness limited to inside each individual? Is it, inside our bodies? And when the bodies die, the consciousness dies? And then that way, consciousness is very personal because I'm separate, physically separate from all of you. So it's my consciousness. But this very sense of my consciousness, me, is the illusion we create through identity with the physical body. Because our bodies seem so real, we have to live with them for a lifetime. And everything that I see, hear, smell, taste, touch, is always something coming from outside, objects of the senses. Or the senses themselves start deteriorating. And the ego doesn't want blindness or poor vision or deafness. But as we age, like old people, talking to old people, encourage, see, it's something to learn from. It's a teacher. It's an ajahn. Old age is an ajahn. Because we learn from it. If we can't learn from it if we identify with it. Because the ego doesn't want to get old. Or as you get old, some people want to die. Because life becomes more difficult and you get put in care homes and you don't know what's going to happen, and what about death? When you die, what happens? What will happen to me when I die is a big fear that most human beings share. So I encourage you to take these teachings, and they're not about believing in them, but they're there for investigation. So we have one of the factors of enlightenment is called Dhammavichya, to investigate reality as we experience it. And these two phrases, all conditions are impermanent, all Dhamma is not personal, are very reference points to begin to not just believe it because the Buddha said so, but to realize this, each one for yourselves. So I've been advised that I should stop talking and open the remainder of time for questions. I'm hard of hearing, so Ajahn Ashoka must come and tell me what you're saying.
So could you discuss consciousness as one of the five aggregates?
The five aggregates are all impermanent. So consciousness through the senses comes and goes and changes. But Dhamma, I'm just opening up to questioning. There's Dhamma, which is apparent here and now and doesn't change. And there's consciousness. When you let go of phenomena, of conditions, there's still consciousness. We call it empty consciousness. And it's silent, it's peaceful. It doesn't change according to conditions. This you can realize for yourself. And in my life as a monk, monastic as a monk, I've had a whole, decades of time to explore this. And so in Thailand, there's monks talk about jitwang, or empty consciousness. And so I really explored that in my life as over the past 50 years. What is emptiness or consciousness without attachment? So the consciousness in the five khandhas is dependent upon the body. You've got the rupa, vedana, sanya, sankhara, vijnana, that's about the physical conditions that are very impermanent and unsatisfactory. So consciousness that we experience through the senses is unsatisfying, because like just losing your sight or your hearing is unsatisfactory. So I'm still conscious through the senses. I can kind of get a hazy view of you over there, but it's not like I wish I could see more clearly and hear you without Ajahn Circle having to interpret. So there's references to consciousness, invisible, infinite, being everywhere. Vinyanang adidasanang anantang sapado pabang. It's part of the scriptures. And this particular phrasing, I've never heard, and before in Thailand, I've never heard any monk talk about it. And where I heard it was in a Buddhist society in London by a Parsi philosopher, a Persian philosopher, who was very much acquainted with the scriptures, and he was teaching at Buddhist society summer school every year about Vinyanang Hanidasanang Anantang Sabado Prabha. And so I found it I think it's in the Udana and several others. But that began to take an interest. Invisible, infinite, splendor everywhere, and that's consciousness. So Vinyanang is consciousness, but it's not eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, and so on. The consciousness operates, like sending it's always operating through the senses. This is what we're conditioned to do, to see, to hear, to smell, taste, touch, and think. This is all through the senses, through the brain, through the organs of the body that are very impermanent and unstable, can easily fall apart. But what I've found is what is permanent, what doesn't change no matter what, is awareness, conscious awareness. And I relate that to Vinyanang Anidasanang Anantang Sapado Pabang, the consciousness invisible, infinite, everywhere. And in the elements, so much emphasis is placed on the solid element, the water element, the air element, the fire element, earth, fire, water, and air, and the impermanence of these elements. And then space and consciousness. So there's consciousness, then there's space, then there's the four elements. And you realize that space couldn't exist if there was no consciousness, or the elements couldn't manifest if there was no space. So it's consciousness that we can, that when we talk about conscious awareness, mindfulness, awakened conscious awareness, this is what we can, each one of us as human individuals can realize for ourselves. And this is the end of suffering, because in the third noble truth is the end of suffering. So with mindfulness, what they call connected mindfulness, not just mindfulness of objects through the senses, through awareness, you suddenly lose your fascination for the forms in space, the thoughts, the views, the conditioning, the ego. You lose that, you're no longer very important. And what is the reality that we can realize is awareness, here and now, conscious, infinite, invisible, everywhere. And then when you realize the utter beauty of that, trying to find peace through institutions, through cultural differences, through class identities, racial identities, endless like that, trying to bring peace and love and kindness is very idealistic. But how can it be possible when each one of us has to live through the conditioning, the karma of our egos, our cultural conditioning, our whole way of thinking? But what transcends all that is conscious awareness, which is impersonal. So as a person can't get enlightened. We talk about the Buddha getting enlightened as a person, but that's just the best you can do with language. Because the ego never becomes enlightened. It can't, because it's a creation. So in monastic life, monks trying to become enlightened, become stream enterers or arahants, it's still part of the ego, wanting to get something you don't have. I'm unenlightened, I want to become enlightened. If I sit in meditation, I'll get enlightened, or we look at various monks, teachers as enlightened or unenlightened. But in terms of personality, I can't see how a personality is not an enlightened personality, because it is just a creation, an illusion of a separate self. But your true nature, when I tell people their true nature is perfect, they don't believe me. Because we're usually identified with what's wrong with us, what we think is weakness or fear or cowardice or guilt, or we endlessly analyze ourselves. Why do I have so much worries? How do I conquer anger and jealousy and fear? How do I get rid of these kind of unwanted emotional states? And as a personality is developed through all those states. It's part of the personality to fear, to be guilt-ridden, to be jealous, to be greedy, to want things that you don't have, to want to get rid of what you don't like. It's all very much conditioning. But what transcends personality, the ego, the cultural conditioning, the language, is conscious awareness. There could be no ego if there is no consciousness. So the consciousness, the ego, is something in consciousness. It arises and ceases. And we begin to recognize the end of suffering here and now. And then that's what we call stream entry. Or so when you have that first insight into the absence of the ego. And so that's why silence, the space between thoughts. I've emphasized the importance of thinking rather than trying to figure out Dhamma with more words or study scriptures, is to investigate, to observe thinking itself. Because, you know, you can observe when you think one word, then there's nothing. So I'd take some kind of neutral statement that didn't arouse any strong emotions in me, like I am a human being. So that's the kind of matter-of-fact belief, doesn't arouse any strong feelings. Pretty boring thing to think. And then you know, just the word, the English pronoun I, just one letter, and there's nothing. And you begin to notice that, to notice emptiness or nothing. And then you intentionally think am. Before you think am, there's nothing there. There's just conscious awareness. And then am is two letters, and then there's silence. And it's beginning to, you know, this is what we call connected awareness, is when you're not just connecting one word with another, one concept or opinion or view with another one, or making judgments about them, but observing the way it is. So over the years, just developing that awareness of the space between words, and as I deliberately think. And when I was at Samanera, before I met Luang Por Chah, I had an insight that I had to stop thinking. And I tried to stop thinking because I had this insight. And, you know, I couldn't really stop thinking, just as a desire to stop thinking. And I thought, I can't meditate, I just think, and I've got to stop thinking, and I try to, you know, willfully stop myself from thinking, but I couldn't sustain it. You can't sustain just willful resistance to thoughts, because it's still the ego operating. I've got to stop thinking. Where I started thinking, intentionally thinking, but not taking an interest in the words or the thoughts, but the space around them. And the silence that the word arises in. What is that? It's fully conscious. It isn't programmed by culture. It's not personal. And it's as simple as that. It's just by, you know, intent. And then the fun of that kind of method was I started investigating all the thoughts I was afraid of. You know, just intentionally, deliberately thinking, but notice not taking an interest in the meaning or the words, but in the space, the silence that they come and go into. And after a while, that silence became very strong, because it's here and now, and it's not created. It's certainly not personal. So out of this, you know, you begin to feel this oneness, this connection to everything, all the created conditions, the animal kingdom, the nature itself, the planet, the sun and moon and stars. Because suddenly you realize consciousness has no boundary or limit, and this is just a form in consciousness. And consciousness doesn't die. It's infinite. It's invisible. Sensory consciousness, very unstable. So in the five khandhas, that's what they're talking about. Sensory consciousness is impermanent.
You speak of, as we start to witness no self and transitory aspects and that as a doorway to connection of a reality that is anchoring, how does love and compassion relate within that?
Well, in emptiness, then like they have these four Brahma Viharas, Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekkha. Are they just ideals according, you read them in the scriptures and they're beautiful ideas to have loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy and equanimity. They're all beautiful English translations of these four viharas. They're called dwelling places, viharas, and but they're natural. They're not just trying to be nice and spread loving kindness to everybody as a person anymore. It's not like me being really nice and kind and in a good mood and spreading loving kindness to all creation, like it can be as a kind of, when we think about it, take it personally, but it's conscious itself, empty consciousness is unconditioned love. It includes everything, it's non-judgmental. And compassion then, the sadness at the misery of others become apparent. You see around you so much suffering, and it isn't that you're totally indifferent to it, but you understand it. There's compassion. It's not just me feeling sorry for poor people or something like that. And then sympathetic joy. Joy at life itself, at the beauty of nature. Like we spent the past 10 days in Seattle, and look at this rhododendron time. It's kind of beautiful, and went to Ajahn Sudanto's hermitage. Beautiful to see. There's a joy in that beauty. It's a sympathy. It's not trying to be joyful about beauty anymore, but it's just the way it is. It's spontaneity, and equanimity is peace. So you find your refuge in conscious awareness, in Dhamma. That's your refuge. Then that's very peaceful. But it's not like indifferent, like you're a zombie or you're totally cut off from everything, or you don't care anymore. But it's then the Brahma Viharas manifest quite spontaneously, just through awakened awareness. So, like loving kindness, metta is, when the formula for spreading loving kindness, you spread loving kindness to the devils and the angels. You're not just spreading loving kindness to angels or more to angels, and you don't spread as much loving kindness to devils. That's the discrimination. Devils are bad, angels are good. But it's no discrimination in awareness. There's no hatred there. That's love. That's unconditioned love.
I'm curious if since you stepped down as the abbot of the monastery, you've noticed any changes in what you focus on in your teaching or in your own practice?
Since you stepped down from the other day, the next thing changes in your practice to focus on teaching.
Well, I was retired 12 years ago. From Amaravati in England. I went back to Thailand for 10 years. And it was, but the mindfulness was a practice. So being mindful at Amaravati when you're the abbot of a monastery, you attend meetings, you're kind of the leader. the central figure that everybody looks to, and that's practice too. You learn how to use the situations as you happen to experience them. So, learning to operate as a senior monk, as a teacher within that particular setting, and you just keep learning as you go along. Because I remember when Luang Por Chah asked me to establish Wat Pah Nanachat, the branch monastery in Thailand, I'd never been a teacher, I was only eight years as a bhikkhu, so I couldn't consider myself an Ajahn. And, so what was I to do? And then, I found myself totally baffled by the situation. So I tried to act like Ajahn Chah. And it didn't work. It was false, trying to be somebody else. And then I kept thinking about Ajahn Chah. What do I love about Luang Por Chah so much? And then he's not trying to act like Ajahn Mun, his teacher. He's exactly who he is. He's a kind of naturally free, happy human being. He is who he is. He's not trying to be a strict Ajahn or anything else. There's a humor, there was kind of joyfulness about Ajahn Chah, and he wasn't playing roles with me. And so, I really found that so inspiring, and I realized I had to just trust being who I am. Learn from the way I operate, from experience itself. Even though, I still made plenty of mistakes, you learn from them. What is useful, what isn't, how can you benefit the monks or nuns in the community, and then, you have certain views, opinions arise, and that, but you're aware of their views and opinions. Can you really grasp those opinions and operate from views or opinions, or trusting more in awareness? And then life becomes more spontaneous rather than programmed and fixed in kind of habitual patterns of thinking and operating in a community. So in Thailand, I lived in a really beautiful monastery in a very nice part of Thailand in what's called Wat Nam Kio, and it's high elevation. Wat Pah Nanachat, the weather there is really terrible, and I thought I'd be settling down in Uwon and Wat Pah Nanachat, but it turned out I spent the past 10 years in this place in Korat province, and quite a beautiful place near a huge national park. And they built this very nice kuti, beautiful kuti, and the head monk, Ajahn Yanadhamma, was very generous and supportive. And the first I went there, I'm trying to operate according to the strict Thai standard, and go and bend about barefoot, and I always had this ideal of how a bhikkhu should behave, and especially when you're in Thailand, I just physically couldn't do that anymore. I've got numb feet. They don't, I tend to fall over. So Ajahn Yanadhamma encouraged me to just eat in my kuti, not go Vrindavan. And I was very grateful for that, because he recognized the limitations of an aging form. But, the old habit patterns from bhikkhu training and all that still operated. still influence you. And, so you have that but the Vinaya, the traditional disciplinary forms, are very, you see them in terms of, rather than absolute right and wrong, good and bad, but helpful suggestions for awareness in daily life for this particular form of bhikkhu, Buddhist monk form. So that still works, but it's no longer identified with it. Or if there is identity, because in monastic life there's a lot of fear of being criticized, of making a mistake, of being wrong, of being looked down on, and things like that. So in monastic life, the ego can flourish strongly if you don't have awareness and wisdom to deal with it. Because the Dhamma, when the Buddha established Dhamma first, and the form itself, the Vinaya, was merely a form created by a human being to allow the tradition of the teachings of the Buddha to be carried from one generation to the next. So that's why we have it. There must have been millions of enlightened Buddhas who nobody knows about because they didn't establish any conventions to operate from. But enlightenment or awareness is natural to us. And that's the Buddha pointed out, how like the Four Noble Truths is a very simple teaching. It's not complicated abstract ideas or metaphysical theories. It's all incredibly practical and to the point. So in Thailand, I had to deal with being a retired old monk, not having any duties, and being alone all the time, and on like that. That's quite interesting because, so much of my life had been in the center of activities, and then suddenly you're alone in a very nice coochie. But you learn from it all, so in that silence, in that aloneness, the silence became so strong. There's one of the scriptural teachings that I love and teach over and over is, there is the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. And if there was not the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned, there'd be no way, there'd be no escape from the born, the created, the formed, the conditioned. So I thought that escape from the born, the created, the formed, the conditioned. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to escape from the born, the created, the formed. I was so tired of myself and my boring personality that, by age 30, I was pretty fed up with life. And I thought, am I going to have to spend 30 more years with these same thoughts? They're just habits. They keep reoccurring, repeating themselves. And that's why I became a monk, was I thought one way I might be able to resolve this problem is I did have a real interest and trust in Buddhism, so that's why I went to Thailand and ordained. But in the silence, I always loved the silence behind the noise. Then in the monastery that I stayed in, they were always constructing buildings. And the head monk is just crazy about cement. And so there's so many cement piles, and there's so many cement buildings and things in the monastery. And then they built this beautiful kuti for living, and then they built another a hospital kuti right nearby, and in the 10 years that I lived there was always construction going on. And the abbot kept apologizing for the noise, but I didn't mind it. You know, if you recognize silence, then noise just comes and goes in silence. So, and then Thai forests are not silent. There's a lot of life in the jungles in Thailand. And they have elephants that run into the monastery, and snakes. You know, in Amaravati, there are no elephants or snakes. So, anyway, England's very kind of safe place to live, right? But, you know, you just use the situation. If you're frightened, you observe it. If you hate the noise, you resent this construction, it's like this. They had these noisy peacocks nesting outside my kutia, and as beautiful as these peacocks are to look at, they make the most horrible noise. And suddenly you're meditating, and they and one lived just right outside, up in the trees over my kuti, and I kept hoping it would go away somehow. But observing that, you know, I knew better than to just be negative about it. I could use the annoyance I felt, and it comes and goes, and I'd wait, and just by allowing annoyance to be, it ceases. Construction noises are impermanent. Peacock cries are impermanent. So all conditions that arise cease. And in their cessation is peace, the cessation of conditioned phenomena. So death is peaceful rather than annihilation. Like if you're attached to the body, then there's a lot to fear. What's going to happen to me when I die? And then there's all kinds, do you go to heaven or hell, or is it oblivion, or rebirth, or reincarnation? There's all kinds of attempts to explain what happens after death from people who haven't died. So then, what is the deathless? The unborn. There is the unborn. And so I used to try to, you know, I could imagine things that begin and end. My imagination's quite vivid, you know, I can create all kinds of fantasies or visions or that with my mind. They come and go. But what is unborn? And you couldn't imagine it. There's no image of the unborn. So just the word imagination or image, there's no way your intellect can imagine the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. But the Buddha said there is the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. So I trusted the Buddha's words. He wouldn't be saying that if it wasn't true. And apparent here and now, what is it? It's conscious awareness. And it's silent. And it's non-judgmental. So, you know, then all these theories about rebirth, reincarnation, heaven, hell, or oblivion are just empty phenomena that human beings create when they don't know what they're talking about.
Yes, you have about 2 minutes before we finish. We could actually wind up, pay homage to the Buddha, and then Pay our respects to the court. Adam, Sumedho, would you like to lead us in the homage to the Buddha, the ending, closing out? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Or Jessica.
We can read together the closing homage on page 16. Aham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, the Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. I render homage to the Buddha, the blessed one. Bhagavato Bhagavata Dhammo, the teaching so completely explained by him. Dhammam Namasami, I bow to the Dhamma. Sripatitanno Bhagavato Sangho, the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Sangham Namami, I bow to the Sangha.